Thanks.
We're good to go.
Thanks, Emily. And thank you all for making it today. This must be a little tougher than usual, given all the rain and wind and everything else. Maybe that's it. Emily, I'll call the meeting to order. Would you call the roll?
Sure. So Ann Gravitt,
I'm here.
Bob Salinger, Lori Stegman, Corky Collier,
Here.
Dave Ritma,
Here.
Eric Mueller,
Here.
not expecting Shirley Craddock, Eric Molander. I think he's going to be late today. James Ellison. He's also late. John Yama,
Here.
John Elbell, Mary Helen Kincaid,
Here.
Mike Jordan,
Here.
Steve Fancher,
Here.
and Tanny Stephenson is going to be late as well. So I only have 8 present. We'll just go ahead and we can start with in the agenda. We can bump the approval of minutes to a later portion if we have others sign on. I have various people who are planning to be here at 4 or at 3:30, or there's going to be quorum at different parts of the meeting. So we can skip the minutes and go to the financial reports and the legislative presentations, and we should be good to go.
Okay, well, that sounds simple to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the next thing, other than passing minutes, is finance. Is that right?
Yes.
Janet on the call?
I am.
All right. Well,
Well, I hope I present this in the format that you guys are accustomed to. First off is, I know that you had requested a new financial statement for the Urban Flood District, and there has been no change since the last report that was presented by Nick Hogan. So I did not prepare a new report since there's nothing new on that. And the contract report for September and October, you'll see that was in your meeting packet. We got quite a few of them done in the months of September and October. A lot of them are on call, some amendments. You'll see the dollar amounts. Urban District, we had 3, Pacific Habitat Services, Winterbrook Planning, and MJL Consulting. I guess, are there any questions about those?
you know, Janet, I think the board's, well, this board's major concern were obviously the contracts that the urban board has. And I understand that the column on the right side of the page is the amount that the contract was written for. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And it might be helpful to know from time to time how much of that contract has actually been exercised, how much is out on it.
Okay.
I don't know how hard that is to do. I don't want to create a huge burden, but
We have that information accessible. That's not that difficult. Are you
Okay.
interested in seeing all the contracts for the other districts that have been written also?
well, I don't know. I guess I would say that's not as much of an issue for me, but the board, for context, the board may want to see them all, and I don't think
Okay.
that's a big problem.
But you would like to see how much we've spent to date on the contracts for the urban district.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
We can do that.
Great.
So then the report will be not just new contracts, but existing contracts also, just showing where we are on those.
That would be really helpful for me to see the status of contracts that we've signed.
All right.
That'd be great.
Okay, yeah, let me work on that and I'll have that ready for the next meeting. Now I know that you also had requested to see how much or how many expenses for the new urban district have been running through the grant through the JCA. Is that correct?
I think and please, anybody jump in and correct me, but we know that grant will run out at some point, and we know we have authorization to continue spending on it this year. And we also know that if we don't get money from the state legislature, we're going to need to start drawing probably on the line of credit. And I think the interest of the board is really to understand kind of the overall financials. And so knowing how much is still in that grant would be helpful so that we can start to think about, and I know staff's already thinking about this, but having the board having a level of transparency about when we might be getting to a point that we need to start drawing on the line. And I think that was, and please, anybody jump in if I'm mischaracterizing our interest in knowing about the expenditures on the grant.
Colin, I thought that we had around $150,000 probably on the grant. Is that
Okay.
Is that accurate?
Correct. Yes, that's
Okay.
accurate. So our current requests are about, I guess, current spend on the grant is about $340,000. There's and some change. There's $150,000 left on that. The burn rate is significantly increased. Before it was pretty much just staff time and a little bit for some of the mission vision value work and other pieces with Miller Nash. But now we really are, the last couple of months, spending $30,000 to $40,000 a month. So that the internal conversations right now are to switch over some of the staff time and other contracting, probably needing to move over to the line of credit starting in the new year, and then carefully manage the rest of it, just focused on the revenue work through the rest of the grant. So we are very confident that we'll be spending all of it within the time that we're extended, but also paying attention to what we need to get through the rest of this fiscal year and forward.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Ben
Yeah.
did prepare a comprehensive financial report that includes the JCA. There's not a clear place in the agenda to get into the details, but there is a report in your packet. And if the board would like, I'm sure Ben could and Janet combined could probably give you a deeper overview of where that stands if it's of interest to the board. But there is a document in your packet that lays some of that stuff out, I believe. Is that correct, Ben?
Yeah, this report that I prepared for the board is an overview of the 2021-22 budget across all 5 districts and the JCA.
Yes, I did see that. Okay. Well, that's great. And I probably didn't absorb each one of those pages. I did see the one that had the different districts across the page. So.
But I want to be clear, we're experimenting with how best to provide that information to you. So please, and this agenda got a little compressed. So
it's okay. It's okay. And I'll just tell the board, this is an iterative process, as Jim just mentioned. And if there's something that's not in that material that you think we really need, let everybody know, and we'll keep working on it so that it's as transparent as it needs to be for the board. So thank you for that extra stuff in there this time. Appreciate it.
I would like to mention, Michael, though, that there is still $160,000 of cash carryover in the urban district checking account from last fiscal year. So
great. Thank you.
Wait, so is the document, Ben, that you're talking about page 7 before the contract thing that Janet, before the contract report, is that what you're referring to?
I'll have to check the PDF document, but it's a PowerPoint slide that says Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Budget Overview.
Oh,
And
no.
I think it's later in the pack.
The end of the
it
packet.
is, yeah.
it's
Okay.
page 45.
Got it. Thank you. So I
Thanks,
was
Emily.
Okay.
things don't get good in your packet till well beyond page 45, honestly.
Oh, it's a tearjerker though. I laughed, I cried. It was amazing. Okay. Any other questions for Janet before we to the legislative issues? All right, Evan, are you queued up for this? Or is Mr. Landauer or?
Yeah, I guess I'll just really quickly turn it over to, is he here? I know I've been texting with him. Mark Landauer, who is our state lobbyist. Yes, I see you. Hi, Mark. Is our state lobbyist and was just recently added, a contract with the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District was added to his all of his contracts with us. We've been working with Mark for years, and Mark was instrumental in helping us to get this district created. And so we invited him to come and talk a little bit about the work we've been doing over the last couple of months around making some potential changes to the ORS Chapter 550, which is our enabling legislation. So Mark, I will turn it over to you to talk about what you've been up to.
Thank you, Evan, and thank you, Chair Jordan. Excuse me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Landauer, and I've been serving as the lobbyist for the Columbia Corridor Drainage District since, I think it's been since 2015. I want to thank the management team for providing me an opportunity to be up here before you today, and for all the support they've provided me over the years. I was asked to give you a brief update on things going on, and in particular, some legislation that we'll be pursuing. So we have been pursuing a bill for the short session, 35-day session that will begin on Tuesday, February 1st. Each member of the legislature has been given 2 bills to introduce in the short session. And interestingly, and for those of you who love this kind of stuff, I find it fascinating. This is the first time since the short sessions were approved by voters in 2010 that senators will be given 2 bills to introduce. Historically, House members have been given 2 bills to introduce during the short session, while senators have only been allotted 1 bill. This will be the first session that senators will actually be allowed to introduce bills. For those of you, for us lobbyists, that means that there are going to be 30 more bills on the table. There are typically about 250 to 280 bills. This will, needless to say, add as many as 30 more bills to that stack of bills that we'll begin reviewing here fairly soon. Additionally, the governor, chief justice, and the BOLI commissioner will also be allowed to introduce 3 bills, which has been customary since the beginning of these short sessions. I want to share with you how our proposal or our bill will be introduced. Representative Paul Evans, who is the chair of the House Veterans and Emergency Management Committee, has agreed to introduce our legislation as a committee bill. I mentioned that each policy committee, or if I didn't, each policy committee is allotted 3 bills as well for introduction as a committee bill. Our proposal will be introduced as such. I want to be sure that we thank Representative Evans for agreeing to introduce this as a committee bill. He only had 1 bill remaining that he could have introduced, and so he was generous enough to give us the space and the opportunity to get this introduced. We also need to thank Speaker Kotek, her staff, as well as our many partners, City of Portland, Multnomah County, Metro Portland, Gresham, whose assistance has really been critical in getting us to where we are today. During these short sessions, there is very little time for making changes to bills because timelines are very, very short. Specifically, we will likely only have 1 shot to pass this bill because the policy committees in the first chamber must typically move their bills out of their committee through a work session within 5 to 7 days after the session begins. That means that our Much of our work with the members of the committee staff, and leadership will need to be completed in advance of the session even beginning. I also want to just briefly share with you that the deadline for the introduction of these bills is 5 p.m. this coming Friday, the 19th. We have been assured that our bill will be introduced by the House committee this Wednesday, when the committee is scheduled to meet. Today is the first of 3 legislative days where most of the legislative committees are meeting formally to conduct hearings. Furthermore, on Wednesday, the Office of Economic Analysis will be providing the second economic and revenue forecast for the biennium, and I will be sure to provide a full report of that forecast Wednesday afternoon. With that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions that the board may have, and thanks again for allowing me to be with you today.
Are any questions for Mark, other than the fact that I'll never forgive him for actually getting this bill passed? It's his fault.
It's a blessing and a curse. I understand.
I have kind of a question and a comment. When I've really been, I testified way back in the beginning when this bill was introduced, and I was so impressed with Mark Landauer because everybody in the hallway, everybody in the room knew who he was and was saying hello. And when we walked into the committee room, I think he said all of about 2 words to some people, and they got up out of their chairs and we had a seat. So I knew that he had some impact, and I was fairly new to all of these political things, and I kind of want to say that way. So thank you for all that support, because I think we've been lucky to have him. I don't know if on our side is a good term, but assisting this project. My question is, at what point could or should, or if it would help, citizen input? I know that there's political entities that can say things. I used to see Tina at the firehouse when it was open, but it's not anymore. But I mean, she would always say, I want to know what a real citizen says, was one of her lines. So I've never heard of Representative Paul Evans. I don't know if it's of any count. My husband's a 22-year Navy veteran, and he could say, I'm a veteran and I live in the flood, whatever, you know, use whatever connection possible. Our neighborhood, I can always rally support and say the neighborhood supports. If that's helpful, I'm more than willing to do it, and let me know how and who, or if it's not, and just let it go its course, because you seem to have more connections and knowledge in that area.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your kind words, Mary Helen. I don't know if you knew this, but I paid each of those individuals $5 before he showed up so I could move them later.
I knew that's how lobbyists work.
Yeah, it's a $5 handshake here and there. Not really. First of all, Mary Helen, I think that you raise a very important point. You know, as we all know, we've been in a global-wide pandemic, and as a result, we've had to really do business differently over the last couple of years. And so at this time, we don't have that opportunity to actually show up in person to testify before these legislative committees. But I think it's very important that the citizens do participate in this process. We have, as a result of the pandemic, adopted a new format, and you're very familiar with that format because we're in the middle of that right now, conducting these hearings through a video conference. I still think it's as equally important today as it has been ever for citizens to participate in the process and to let their voices be known. So I would expect that our bill will be heard by the House Veterans and Emergency Preparedness Committee, and we'll be sure to communicate through the districts and other avenues to ensure that everyone is aware when our bill will be up for a hearing, so that you're given that opportunity to participate in the process. And again, Mary Helen, it's great to see you. It's been a while, and thank you again for your very kind words.
Okay, so we'll get some kind of notice and I can get people to go and testify in our little pretend pictures on a screen.
Indeed,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions for Mark?
Mr. Chair, I was just going to ask, I read through the material in the packet and it seems straightforward. I just didn't know if there's anything that Mark wanted to point out in particular regarding the proposed changes.
Well, that's always a interesting question, Mr. Mueller, because there's an old saying in the building, you can provide legislative counsel the information that you hope will be returned to you. And oftentimes you find that they've turned a hammer into a sledgehammer or a hammer into a toothpick. So again, until we get the language back from legislative counsel, it's going to be very important for us to review that language, ensure that it accomplishes what we've set out to do and avoids any unnecessary or unintended consequences, which always tends to create quite a bit of dust in the building. Although we'll be conducting these hearings through video media, we will be sure to review the legislative council's draft before it ultimately gets put into formal bill language and is introduced as a measure. So thank you for that question.
So if I heard you right, Mark, you expect introduction Wednesday.
The bill will be, a request for a bill will be made to legislative council.
Okay.
We have also provided committee staff with the necessary paperwork for them to begin the actual drafting of this proposal.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The other issue that we have in this session, and I'm not sure what the status is, that we're attempting to request again, I think, the $2 million that we requested during the long session. Any information on that?
Well, that's an interesting question, Mr. Chair, because we seem to be having some internal discussions. My personal view is we absolutely need to be continuing looking for financial assistance, whether it be in the form of assistance in getting the new district to be able to identify what a equitable revenue source might look like, communicating with various communities across the district's sphere of influence, things of that nature. I would say, though, that at this time, it may be a difficult push to get $2 million for the original concept that we had brought in the short session, or I should say, excuse me, during the long session last session. As you'll recall, we did make a $2 million request, and that request never materialized. We have had subsequent conversations with the speaker and other members in leadership, and it has been suggested to us that we look for an alternative options. And as a matter of fact, I shared with staff yesterday some information that the Legislative Assembly did make $150 million available for emergency preparedness, mitigation, things of that nature. This may be an opportunity for us, and we're exploring that. However, I think that our original concept for that supported the $2 million request may have some challenges that it faces before the entire Legislative Assembly, and in particular, the Full Ways and Means Committee. We haven't necessarily given up on that concept, Chair Jordan, but I would say that it would be a challenge. And so we're reassessing what type of ask we may have. And one of the unique parts about this, which is sort of nice actually, is that this $150 million that was set aside by the Legislative Assembly during the last session, it's available until December 1 of 2022. And that money would actually be distributed by the emergency board. We're looking into how we might be able to access that funding. And as soon as we have a clear picture on how that money will be applied for and how it will be chosen, we'll share that information. But I think that may be a real opportunity for us to look at some possible funding for some capital improvements that may make things a little bit easier in other areas. I hope that addresses your question.
Incredibly inadequate answer, Mark, but I'll take it. So,
That's what lobbyists, that's what we're trained to do, Mr. Chair, as you know.
well, you think we could find somebody to carry the rock that isn't running for governor? Maybe that would help.
I'm going to leave that one alone.
Other questions of Mr. Lane?
I have one question, just because you touched on other sources of funding. And I had a late call conversation yesterday with a couple county commissioners about the homeless issue and Fairview Lake, and I'm sure that'll come up later, and I don't want to get into that. But they indicated that there was state funding for emergency preparedness to alleviate the cause of flooding and support those efforts. And I don't know how that would fit in. I don't know, but it seemed like it was a very good opportunity. And Evan may get in on the conversation because I gave them your name and contacts, etc. And Jim's, they knew you. But to be able to pursue something along, when you said emergency preparedness, if they're not allowed to go there and say the levees, then we're going to have a lot of people's houses flooded, just like happened. So it's sort of a suggestion, sort of a, I don't know how it would all work, but I think it's an avenue for some kind of alternative funding. I don't know if it's in the $5 million range, but.
Well, just in quick response, Mary Helen, not only did the legislature provide $150 million for emergency preparedness, and I guess you could also consider it climate adaptation, but the legislature also provided literally hundreds of millions of dollars for housing, homelessness. Now, and I'm not here to suggest that this is in any way, shape, or form that type of an investment is going to solve our issues, but the legislature, I think, for the first time in my recollection, has literally put hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars to this very vexing social challenge that we're all facing. And you know, it won't solve these problems overnight, but I do think that there is a full-throated and full-hearted commitment to try to address some of these challenges that played themselves out just in the last couple of weeks over in the Fairview area. So thank you for that that question.
Okay, gang, I'm going to move us along because I think, Emily, we've got a quorum. I think we're at 9.
Yes.
And so since I know people have to come and go today, I'd like to move some of the items that we've got that we need a quorum to move. And I
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
the minutes. And if you've all had a chance to look at the minutes, I'd entertain a motion to approve them if you can. Bueller, anyone?
I move to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Thank you, Steve.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ann. Any comments or issues with the minutes? I just wanted to note that I appreciate Mr. Collier's flexibility at the last meeting because he's listed both as being present and absent. So Way to go, Corky. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, I think we got all ayes there.
This Corky knows all, sees all, regardless of whether he's present. It's important to know
This
that.
is
I worked hard at that. I'm glad you appreciated it.
omnipresent. So, okay, the next issue, I think, is a policy issue. Is that right?
So we do have a second half of legislative updates. Julie Minerva is here to talk through the federal legislative updates. And so that's. the
Let's do
second half
that.
of
I'm sorry.
We
I didn't
do
know
have the
that.
one potential procurement item as well.
Yeah, so,
So the other two decisions is the civil rights policy and the, yes, the LCRB rules update. So if you want to go through those, that probably is a fairly short discussion. We just want to be respectful of Julie's time, obviously, because she's a guest. But I think we're on a good half hour that we have a quorum, so we might want to just go to the policy decisions. Up to you.
And Julie is
Okay.
on the East Coast, so we need to be thoughtful.
well, then let's do Julia, and we'll hope we can continue to keep a quorum. So, Evan, are you introducing?
Yeah, I will be very brief so we can keep this show on the road. I am pleased to introduce Julie Minerva, who is our federal lobbyist and has also been working with us since right around 2015 and was instrumental in helping us to get the U.S. Army Corps feasibility study, which is one of the things she's going to talk about, along with the massive amounts of money that are going towards infrastructure that were just recently adopted. So, Julie, I will turn it over to you. And
Great. Well, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you. And I want to echo Mark's comments. It's very nice to be able to present to everybody today. And first, I really want to say congratulations. You achieved a huge milestone over the summer by getting your chief's report signed by General Spellman at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And you are one of few projects that have been able to speak with a unified voice and meet the requirements of smart planning. That is no small task. That's not to say that we don't see people make its way through the federal process, but it is not an easy thing to stay on track with just 3 years for a study. So congratulations. We're excited to be at this point in time. And my slides are going to talk about what those next steps and opportunities look like. So next slide, please. So this really is Infrastructure Week here in Washington, D.C. We can finally say that and have it be really meaningful. And I know you all saw that the president signed the infrastructure package earlier today. The infrastructure package is just one piece of the Build Back Better agenda. So I'll be touching on that. But also in the backdrop, we are working on the regular appropriations budget, so FY22 out here in DC, as well as the Water Resources and Development Act for 2022. So some really big things happening on the legislative front out here in Washington. Next slide, please. So just to give you a quick review of the infrastructure package, this has been a long time in the making, years in fact, but this slide gives you just a brief overview of what we've been seeing here at the federal level to get to this point. And just so very pleased to have had this pass. And I'm just looking now and I see I have October 15th listed as the date. It's November 15th that the president signed it. We'll fix that and get that back over to you. But this was passed in the House and Senate in a bipartisan manner, which is really, really incredible. We don't see a lot of things in DC happen with a member of both the Republican and Democrats coming together, and this was one. And a lot of the statements that were made at the White House today urging that continued bipartisan cooperation on other big legislative items that need to get through the Congress and over to the White House. So next slide. So what I really want to point out to you in the infrastructure package, because as you know, it's $1.2 trillion. This is a massive undertaking that really focuses on physical infrastructure. So that's roads, bridges, waterways, broadband. Those were the areas of agreement to get the infrastructure package moved through the House and the Senate. But as it relates to your project, there's $16 billion and change in there for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and their Civil Works mission. This pot of money is really designed to help the Corps buy down its backlog of existing projects. So there is $109 billion worth of authorized but unfunded Corps of Engineers projects. So when you look at things like the $11 billion for construction, that's really designed to go towards the backlog. But what's in there to help further your study along is $150 million for general investigations. The general investigations account funds the preliminary engineering and design activities that will further your study from signed chief's report to being eligible for a construction fund. So it's great to see this amount of money included in here. Now, we also have taken a really comprehensive look at what is in the infrastructure package, and that's something that we provided to staff because we want to make sure that outside of the funding for the Corps of Engineers, that we are identifying other opportunities that could help flood risk reduction measures for the region. So that is identifying funds within the Department of Transportation and other areas that like FEMA that could really help outside of the traditional levee project that we're focused on with the Corps. Next slide, please. So in addition to the infrastructure funding that will roll out any day now, we are also taking a look at the FY22 appropriations process because much like the infrastructure package, it also includes funding for the general investigations account. You could get funding from the infrastructure package or the annual appropriations bills. It really doesn't matter. It's the same color of money for you. It just means there's more money out there this year. And so that increases your opportunity to get something. But also what's interesting out here at the federal level is after a 10-year ban, Congress decided to allow for the practice of earmarks to return. So we are seeing earmarks for the Corps of Engineers in the FY22 House and Senate Energy and Water appropriations bills. This builds, of course, on what the president proposed in his budget and is something that we are keeping an eye on because it could be an opportunity for construction funds for you down the line. Ultimately, I think that the FY22 appropriations process won't wrap up until around Christmas, maybe a little bit later. So again, the immediate opportunity for funding is the infrastructure package and the secondary opportunity would be FY22 appropriations. Next slide, please. So this just gives you an idea of a comparison between the funding. The Corps of Engineers, thankfully, is one of the places in the federal government where we see continued bipartisan cooperation. And you see that here with the level of funding that's proposed by both the House and Senate. I'll tell you that this $8.6 billion in the House and the $8.7 billion in the Senate are record numbers for both bodies as it relates to the Corps of Engineers. And we're just seeing that trend grow. I know overall, $8.5 billion isn't a lot given the need that's out there, but we are seeing this number inch up every single year. And so that is something that's really nice to see. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there are a couple of ways to get funding to move this project along. The infrastructure bucket is one of them, but we also are going to have an annual appropriations process to work through. So we can either first be included in the president's budget. That's something that the president releases in February of any given year. And it's really the starting point for the federal appropriations process. Secondarily, we can have project funding added in as either an earmark or as a work plan. So all of this money is the same kind of money at the end of the day. You just have a better indication of where things stand based on whether or not you're in the president's budget or an earmark or a work plan play. So it's all the same at the end of the day, but of course, you know, we like to try to get in sooner rather than later so that we have a better idea of how the year is going to look. Next slide, please. So before we can get to all the big construction dollars that will be out there, we first need to get authorized in the Water Resources Development Act. This is a piece of legislation that Congress tries to move every 2 years. And the WRDA 2022 process is just now kicking off in the Senate. And we are at the point where we're submitting formal requests to both Senators Wyden and Merkley to include the Chief's report as a construction authorization item in the WRDA 2022 bill. We will follow up and do something similar with the House in early calendar 2022 when that process moves forward. We also expect that this will be one of about 25 Chiefs reports that will be authorized in the WRDA 2022 bill. That's at least the working number that the Corps of Engineers has shared with me. So as you know, as I mentioned earlier, this is always a competitive process at every step in the game. So continuing to speak with that one voice really will make a difference at the end of the day. And then also just want to mention that we are seeing Mike Connor, who is the new Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works and a really important stakeholder in the Corps of Engineers Civil Works world. He just got confirmed by the full Senate, and I'm hearing that he will get sworn in towards the end of the month. And so we're also working to prepare a congratulatory letter to send to Mr. Connor, so that he can have a better idea of who we are and what the region represents before we put an ask in front of him, which is always a nice thing to be able to do. Next slide. So this is the next steps, right? We've got a lot going on, but I really want to emphasize just how well coordinated you've been through this entire process. The delegation knows you well, the decision makers at the Corps headquarters, the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, and OMB all know you very, very well. We've been doing a lot of virtual meetings, as everyone has, and we did a virtual fly-in last fall and then a follow-up this spring with the entire delegation so we could bring them along at every step of the way. So while you see these big milestones, just know that in the background there is a lot of continued work and coordination that's going on. In addition, we've also had a lot of new staffers to educate and bring up to speed, because while you've kept the 3-year study on track, 3 years for a congressional staffer is a long time in an office, right? So we're always continuing to meet new people and bring them up to speed. And you guys have done a really, really wonderful job at that. And I think one of the things that's helped tremendously is the quality of your materials. You've just put together outstanding briefing packets that really display both graphically and in good metrics just how important this project is to the region. And I can tell you, we've gotten some really tremendous feedback on those materials. So thank you to you and your team for always giving us some good supporting materials to help make the case here. So next steps, we're going to be working towards getting funding in the infrastructure package or the FY22 appropriations bill. The infrastructure package is entirely a competitive process. So I just want to point out, there's a lot of press releases going on right now about who's getting what money and where it's flowing. Just know there are no earmarks in the infrastructure package. Nothing is predetermined to very specific projects at this point. And so for us and the Corps, this will all be a competitive process to a work plan that you've done very well on in the past. Same thing goes for the Department of Transportation and every other source of funding that is out there. Aside from some typical formula funds, everything will be a competitive grant process and something that we will help you through to identify. Likewise, as I mentioned, the time for WRDA 2022 is now. We've got forms that will be submitted to the senators and then likewise in the House early next year. And we're also engaging with the congressional delegation to try to lay the groundwork for the president's FY23 budget, which will come out in early February of calendar 2022. And to help that process along, we likely will have an earmark request. So this is the first time we'll be able to make an earmark request, and it will be for the PED funds to get the engineering and design done of this. So in any case, we are always trying to make sure that we take a very comprehensive approach to the needs of the region. So the Corps of Engineers funding is one path forward. But as I mentioned, when we're talking about either the infrastructure package or the forthcoming reconciliation package, which might provide some additional funding more on the climate side of things, we're trying to look as broad as possible so that if there is a source of funding that would assist the project, but may not necessarily be something that you can apply for, but your partners in a city or a county or even the state DOT could apply for. We want to make sure we're identifying those things and seeing how we can coordinate with others so that we can deliver this comprehensive approach to your flood risk reduction measures. So I walked you through a lot pretty darn quick, and happy to answer questions.
So before any questions, Julie, I want to apologize for not realizing it's nearly 7 o'clock where you are, and for me to try and move the agenda around. So I apologize for that and really appreciate all of your work.
No worries at all. Thank you.
You bet. Any questions? I can't see you all, so go ahead and jump in if you have any.
I just have my typical acronym question. I've got most of them down. I keep a list in my book. Tell me again what IIGA is.
Sure, that is the formal name of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So
Okay.
that's the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, I have like a little vocabulary page for different meetings because different worlds use different same acronyms for different words. So, okay, thank you.
You bet.
Not seeing any other questions. Evan, anything else for this section?
Good, thank you.
Julie, thanks so much. Really appreciate you coming in the evening from DC or anytime, okay?
Thank you, and look forward to seeing you all virtually for meetings. So thank you.
All right, thanks again. So Emily, I think we still have a quorum. So can we move to the next issue, which I think is the Civil Rights Non-Discrimination Policy, right?
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. Is that right, Emily? Am I the next one on the list? Okay, cool. I'll take it. Perfect. Thank you all. My name is Brian. I've spoken to you a couple of times now. For those who may not know me, I'm a project manager at MCDD, and this is a project that's a little bit out of my normal realm. It's kind of some energy towards helping us with our public accommodation process alongside the public affairs and legal team. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Emily. I'm just going to share what I'm asking for at the beginning of this presentation, and then I'll add some details so you know before you adopt this or have discussion on it, what we're talking about here. So the goal of today, there's a resolution in your packets that includes some direction for the executive director as well as a policy document. This was approved at the last format meeting by the other 4 districts. So we're bringing it to you now to also approve. It's to establish a non-discrimination policy for public accommodation. So it's sort of the external focused non-discrimination policy. We do have one internally for staffing purposes, for kind of like the workplace. So it's a little bit of a different focus. Next slide for sort of why we're bringing this to you now. Ultimately, the public does have a right to be able to access our programs through civil rights mandates and participate in our public process. And when we were looking at our policies, administrative practices with our regional partners, we noticed that we did not have a policy for this with the current districts. And so took the initiative to work together with our team to go ahead and bring forth something for you to consider. Next page. So our goal is to kind of align our districts with best practices as well as legal requirements. This is definitely something that aligns with the new district's mandates around being more engaged with our community and more in alignment with that. So this is just will only help further that goal. But it outlines applicable laws that apply to the provision of public services without discrimination, as well as directing the executive director to administer and implement a policy. So that is kind of the main body of it. If you have any questions on it, I'm happy to answer them. Next slide. And there's a moment here, a couple more things, and then we'll get to questions. I apologize. So what it does ask for is that staff will be designated to do this right now. Currently, if someone were to ask the districts to make a public access request or a public accommodation request, we would have to figure out what to do. We don't really have a lot of formal structure. So this is kind of a goal to set up structures around this and make the process as smooth as possible, as well as having staff dedicated to it. We would also be working on creating a reasonable accommodation procedure, a complaints process for someone who feels that they've been discriminated against, as well as to draft a language access plan for how people could be able to interact with the district's programs and services. Next slide. Overall, we do not currently get requests for this. So this is sort of trying to get ahead of the curve. And so the goal of this is to create some structure and make people more aware of what they're allowed to ask for, and to encourage people to feel welcome and to be able to access our services. So it's creating some structure around that. So help create some ongoing programmatic work to be able to make it easier for the public, if they're interested in our work, to be able to participate and benefit from it. Next slide. In the short term, what we intend to do, other than creating this structure, is to also begin creating a non-discrimination webpage in English and Spanish that has our forms, policies, information on how to request a reasonable accommodation or submit a complaint. We'll be promoting this, on our website and through our newsletters, as well as on social media. And additionally, we'll have printed copies of the policy and forms available, for when we open up our campus, or if someone happens to be here at the front desk or other logical locations around. Next slide. We'll also post in public locations. So I'm picturing break rooms, maybe behind the front desk, in both English and Spanish, in the primary languages in our region, although there are others, and that's part of our goals to continue to work on access for others. Have those physically posted, so in case someone were to want to know how to access it, as well as train our staff on where to go and how to do this. And most importantly, having contracts and accessing local price agreements to be able to actually provide the services someone might request of us, interpretation, translation, etc. So those are some of our near-term goals. This is kind of an ongoing challenge, and something to continue to work and grow over time as we grow the program. So these are some initial actions that are anticipated, and I know that the public affairs team has goals of continuing on this in subsequent years. Next slide. Yeah, I guess that's what I had to cover. Are there any questions before we move to a motion? I know that some of you have heard about this already from other board meeting that I presented at, but welcome questions from that group or from others as well.
Brian, I have a couple questions. And it came up in a similar kind of discussion. I totally support the whole concept of accessibility and accommodation, but how do people find out about it if they, are not, you said website in the front desk? Will this be distributed to neighborhood associations to put on their websites, or I know mailings are expensive, so I'm not going to suggest that, but the neighborhood organizations are starting to have cleanups, gatherings, that sort of thing, so that people know that they can ask for this. So it's kind of like, how are people going to access it? So I didn't see that specific inclusion of more than your facilities. And the other question I had was a statement you made about how to access the district's work. I didn't quite understand what the, overall provide flood safety. I mean, I just think that needs to be more clearly, because I know there are people going to think, well, I can go out and see them fixing the pump, or, they're going to see actual work. So that I think that needs to be clarified a little bit. And the Public Affairs Committee, is that staff and board members, or what compromise is that?
Yeah, I'll do.
That was a lot of questions.
That was several, and I'll do my best to answer them. And I know Evan's here and available to help me if I get stuck or not quite sure. I think it's a great idea to share with neighborhood associations. We've been doing a lot of that recently with other projects like the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. That has been an effective way of distributing out messages. So I think that's a great idea. I didn't give a comprehensive list of all the possible ways. It was sort of a summary. Like, thank you for sharing that. And I think you can anticipate that that would be a way we get the word out. As far as accessing our work, I think that's, you know, that's, I would think of it more from public meetings or kind of more the public process than it is any difference in how we're doing our work from people benefiting or not benefiting from it directly from a flood safety perspective. But I think a lot of people don't know what we do. So some of it is helping people become aware of the benefits they are receiving and know that we exist and helping those that want to be a part of our process to be able to do so. So I think that's more of the emphasis there. Lastly, as far as public affairs, that, you know, Evan and Aster are our public affairs team. So it's not necessarily a committee or a work group at the moment that I was referring to. I was just saying I was helping that team out as a project manager to kind of facilitate the process and give energy to this. It looks like you're on the phone, so hopefully you got what you needed there. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, I welcome them here. So.
Just a couple comments. First, Brian, thank you for the presentation and for working on this. One comment is, in the future, in bringing policy matters to the board, it might be helpful to have some standard templates or standard items as it relates to the priorities of the board. So, for example, when we take something to City of Portland City Council, we typically want to mention things, how this will affect our climate change policy, equity objectives, and cost. You know, what's the cost of a policy? So I certainly don't need that for this, but as this new organization develops, really thinking about how policy matters really fit into high level priorities. And again, I'm supportive. Thank you.
Thanks. Evan?
Brian, if you don't mind, I'd like to add a little bit of context. I think for the Drainage District Board members, you heard us say this already, but this is really standard, basic stuff that we just are really behind on because we're tiny and people frankly haven't cared about us in the past. That's changing a little bit, although I imagine that people are always only going to care about us to a certain extent in a crisis. But we want to be a little bit more ahead of the curve in what we're offering. So, I mean, I hope at some point, Mary Helen, that we're in a land where anybody who needs an accommodation from any type of communication aids knows that any government entity will provide that to them, and that we're not having to sort of make that known at a neighborhood level. Obviously, we're not there yet, but that should be pretty standard. And if you look at any other government, regional governments communications, it's pretty basic stuff. So I love the recommendation, James, and we'll definitely talk to Emily and Jim about how we can better employ that.
I do. I think this is really important stuff, and it is kind of foundational how you run a government and access to everybody in the community. So really appreciate the questions and the comments. I think we're about to lose a quorum. John, had a question? Go ahead.
I do. And in the resolution, it says create a non-discrimination webpage in both English and Spanish. Have they thought about expanding drop-down menus to add languages?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think, so I mentioned creating a language access plan. So within that, there will be a consideration of like what other languages could we expand that to, and maybe the costs and prioritizing those accordingly. So that's kind of our first priority for accessibility, but I agree there are certainly other languages. You know, I can think of a few: Vietnamese, Russian, etc. So great point, John. And Evan, did you want to add to that or respond to that?
Time and money. We will definitely want to add to that over time and are trying to prioritize largest by population size.
Thank you.
Yeah, great point.
So, gang, I'm going to entertain a motion to move this forward if there is one.
Thanks, Mike. I move that the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board adopt resolution 2021-11-01, adopting a non-discrimination policy for public accommodation.
Thank you, James.
And I'll second that.
Okay, James on the motion and Corky on the second. Any further comments or questions? If not, Evan, you need to, or excuse me, Emily, you need to call the roll.
Yes, I do. Let's see here. Okay. And I see Tanny also arrived, so he might be
Okay.
bacon on that quorum need. All right, so to start at the top for approval of this resolution, Ann Gravitt,
Yes.
Corky Collier,
Yes.
Dave Ritma,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Yes.
James Allison,
Yes.
John Niama,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Michael Jordan,
Yes.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
and then Tanny, I am not sure if you'd like to weigh in on this one since you weren't here for the full presentation. I think he's not quite with us yet, so we can leave it at that. All right, we're good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you all very much. And I know Tammy has joined us, and I know that Steve Fancher had to leave. So that's what I was trying to make sure we kept a quorum long enough. The next item is some LCRB updates. Thank you, Brian, very much. Appreciate it. And I think Kelly Sherbo's here for this item.
Yeah, so in your packet, you have a resolution. And actually, I'm going to ask you, Mike, to have us go into session as the local contract review board before we do this real quick.
Okay, Kelly, at advice of staff, we're now going to enter into role as the local contract review board. And so awaiting a staff presentation.
Thank you. So now that you're wearing your LCRB hats, this is a set of rules for personal services, which you already adopted. So there's only 2 small changes that I added to this section. So it looks like a lot because I went ahead and put the full thing in there so that you could see the changes in context. But the only additions are, I believe, section 225 under selection by negotiation, which is kind of an alternative to formal or informal procurements. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility in very specific situations to do negotiated contracts where we don't have to do a more competitive process. And we added this number 5 at the bottom for that the contractor is a nonprofit, a not-for-profit organization, and the contractor and district will share in the decision-making process and work together to define a scope and contribute resources according to mutually agreed upon arrangement. And I'm going to look to Jim a little bit, but I know his intent here was to allow us, as we're kind of going through this formation process with this new district, to take advantage of nonprofit agencies that have missions that support ours and allow us to do sort of a co-creation process. And so this gives us a little bit of flexibility to support and look to those specialized entities to bring their expertise to what we're doing in specific situations. So Jim, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that description.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, and thank you, members of the board. I think the other point that I would add is we don't have any specific nonprofits in mind yet, although we are speaking to a full range of local nonprofits around the development of the new mandates, particularly around cultural history, where we want to engage with culturally specific nonprofits. Engaging in an RFP felt a little awkward. And this language is modeled off of language that is currently used by Metro and by the city of Portland. They have these tools available, which is how I knew about them. I've used them in the past in the development of policy for the Metro Council. And so again, what we're looking to do is really develop a more formalized and thoughtful co-created partnership with a few community-based organizations to develop recommendations on the new mandates for you in a timely fashion, hopefully by late spring, early summer next year.
Thank you. And then the other small change that we made is adding this section 230 called emergencies. So in the prior version that you all had passed, the emergencies section was just reserved. And I think that's because we were looking into potentially expanding that a little bit more But we did some research and we had some recent experience with emergencies, and felt that it was really appropriate to kind of leave the emergencies section just in here for personal services, to give us a specific pathway when we have an emergency to get personal services, which is generally not the kind of services that we would need during an emergency. Generally, we're looking at needing equipment, you know, things like that. But it's here in case we need it. And it mirrors what the other 4 districts have passed through the JCA.
I guess 2 other points for me would be, we're excited to have this opportunity, but in this case, it is not an emergency. So I really am committed to making sure you guys feel comfortable with our procurement rules. So if you'd like more time to think or discuss this, we don't have an emergency to make this decision today. If there are any questions, it's more important to me that you feel like you've got the appropriate fiscal and contracting controls in place.
Okay, any questions or comments from the board?
Just a quick question. I apologize. Under item number 1, personal services, is that, I'm not familiar with that. Is that personnel services or?
So personal services it's kind of a catch-all category that's provided in the contracting code that agencies can make their own rules about. So generally they're the kind of services that are, well, let's see, I'll go to the definition here so I don't. They require specialized technical, creative, professional, communication skills, talents, unique, specialized knowledge, or the exercise of discretionary judgment skills. So things that are not fungible, so that you're looking at somebody with a little bit more specialized expertise that is not just, you know, janitorial services or things like that, that many people could provide kind of at the same level. And so we made a more specific definition that pertained to what the districts do. So including things like land use planning, public relations, DEI consultants, graphic design, kind of things that we know that we're going to need or that we've used in the past, and tailored the definition to that sort of idea.
Thank you. That's
the other point was all the other, you know, levels and limits and board approvals are required. It just adds this new category. So we're not changing any of the other delegated authorities that you've already provided to us.
Other questions? All right, my question, Kelly, regarding a motion is, we currently have the emergency language in, correct?
Yes. Well, it's in the version that you would pass.
Yes, so I would say whoever makes the motion, and Kelly, maybe you can advise this because I don't have a nice red typed motion in my packet. So I could see the resolution, and I'd entertain a motion to pass this resolution. And you guys have heard about the issue of the emergency. If you're comfortable with it, go ahead and make a motion and we can move forward. If you need assistance, Kelly may be able to assist you in wording a motion.
Mr. Chair, I would move approval of the LCRB resolution number 2021-1102 LCRB, a resolution adopting the rules of procedure for the procurement of personal services contracts.
Thank you, Eric. That was really well done.
Just read off the screen.
You sound like you've done this. Sound like you've done this before. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Corky. Any further comments or questions? If not, Emily, would you do the roll?
Yes, Ann Gravitt,
Yes.
Corky Collier,
Yes.
Dave Ritma,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Yes.
James Allison,
yes.
John Niama,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Michael Jordan,
Yes.
and Tanny Stephenson.
Yes. Great. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Kelly, Appreciate it. And the next item, I think, is the mission, vision, values. Evan?
We did miss the revenue subcommittee. Also, that charter needs approval as well.
Oh, excuse
Way
me.
back at the top, I know.
Colin, how could I have forgotten?
You guys don't really care about the revenue development anyway, so no big
Right.
deal.
Well, I thought Colin was just going to fix it for us. Oh, guess not. You're up,
Going
Colin.
to require some input. Thank you. Wanted to give a quick update on the subcommittee's activities and where we are on the revenue analysis and development. But before doing that, there is a charter for the subcommittee. And Emily, can you pull up the slides, or if you give me control, I can do that. But the charter was brought to the committee at their October 25th meeting, and it gives them the charge of doing the following, of developing the viable revenue options for the new board for the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, making recommendations to the board as a whole, helping guide the work of the contractors. Right now, that's the Echo Northwest contract and their various subcontractors, and then coordinating with the other subcommittees of the board, various stakeholder groups, and the technical advisory group, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a few minutes. Emily, can you next slide, please? So the charter is in your packet. It is 11 members. It is all board members as required through the bylaws. That is 65% of the board as a whole. So solid representation on the committee. At upcoming meetings, we will select a presiding officer, and I think at least by the bylaws and the charter, the presiding officer will be doing some of the reporting out to your board as a whole. And just all of their meetings are according to the bylaws and public meeting law. So they're all noticed and recorded, and we have meeting minutes for it. Voting is quorum is required, a quorum of the whole 11 members. For any kind of votes, the majority of those total members are needed. So those are the details at a glance. If you've had a chance to take a look at it in the packet, or if you have any questions, please let me know. It was reviewed and approved by the committee to be brought to the board as a whole for approval. And then it will be signed off on by the presiding officer once that's selected. Are there any questions about the charter? If there aren't, Emily, go to the next slide. Would entertain. Oh, go
That's
ahead.
okay, Colin. Yeah. So if there are no questions or comments, entertain a motion on the screen.
I'd like to do it because there's an acronym there that I really like. The Revenue Analysis and Development is a RAD committee. So I move that the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District adopt the charter of the Revenue Analysis and Development Subcommittee.
I'll second that.
All right. Moved by Mary Helen, seconded by John. And Emily, would you call the roll? You're muted.
I only had 3 screens, so it turns out to not be enough. All right, so Ann Gravitt,
Yes.
Dave Ritma,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Yes.
John Yama,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Corky Collier,
Yes.
Michael Jordan,
Yes.
James Allison,
Yes.
and Tenny Stephenson.
Yes.
I think that's everyone.
Great. Thank you all. And thank you, Colin. And I know you've got a little more, but I'm absolutely excited to be a part of a RAD committee. That hasn't happened since I was 20. So
I think you had to be, it's from the 60s. So we might be the only ones, and I don't know, not the only ones, but I was excited because I was never rad in my younger life, so now I get to.
There you go. So Colin, continue.
I'm pretty excited about it. One of my favorite movies in my youth is a movie called Rad, which is about BMX racing, and I would say it was pretty formative. So yeah, I'm glad that came together. There is also a advisory group, which is the TAG. So we got a real Rad TAG group coming together. So just a very quick, sorry, that was
bad.
I just wanted to give a quick update on both the committee's work as well as what Echo Northwest and staff have been working on. So there is a good bit of work going on around characterizing the district's activities and needs, as well as putting together a draft cost memo. That cost memo has a lot of holes in it, which is what the different advisory groups are being charged with opining on and coming up with the recommendations to fill in what's needed for the modeling. The subcommittee in particular is working through the revenue options and the evaluation criteria for the screening. That first meeting, or sorry, the second meeting of the committee was on the 25th, where they were presented with a draft memo on those revenue options that laid out sort of the whole world of availability and highlighted some political and legal challenges to particular options. The next steps are to refine those, pass them through an evaluation criteria for screening, and come out with hopefully a narrowed set of revenue options to model. And that's just for the difficulties of some of them, both legally and politically, and also just for a more manageable modeling effort and not modeling everything possible. We're also convening a technical advisory group. That first meeting of the technical advisory group will take place this Wednesday, and they will be providing advice that's going to go to the RAD committee. And they have a draft matrix that lays out all of these different revenue options and at least does a first analysis on feasibility, and they'll be providing some recommendations to the committee as a whole as far as what should be screened out and to actually move forward to this board for final recommendations. So the RAD committee will have, revenue analysis committee will have another meeting at the end of November. And all of this is moving toward actually building the model. And so we'll have some openings for the different costs that will go into the model, but we'll have a set of revenue options. We'll have a set of a memo that identifies the different benefits and beneficiaries. And then we'll actually also have a geographic component to look at the potential for different geographic tiers to model toward. So all of this is coming together. There will be a model and a summary of all of these in a report that will come to this board, aiming for end of January. And at that point, the actual modeling and sort of doing the different adjustments will be happening in earnest at the same time as we refine what those different cost options are. Are there any questions on where we are currently on this revenue analysis work or where we're going?
Seeing none. Sounds like lots of work coming, though. Okay, anything else, Colin?
No, thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. And as most people I'm sure can see, lots of moving parts here, trying to bring those all together to be able to run the model early next year and give us some meat to chew on, I think, regarding different alternatives. So now, Evan, mission, vision, values?
Yeah, so we have made some forward progress since the last time we were with you all. As some of you may recall, last month we shared a draft of the mission, vision, values and broke into small groups to talk about it. We then took that feedback as well as feedback from the staff and turned it all over to our fearless leader, Jim Midoff, who took a crack at putting his creative writing skills to work for us. And he generated, I really appreciate, I'm way too close to it to write anything decent at this point. So Jim wrote a draft that staff had a crack at, and then the committee met, I guess it was last Tuesday, it feels like 12 years ago, but it was less than a week ago. We met and got some really valuable feedback that we were not being forward thinking enough about where we were headed. And so you have a draft in your packet that we had put together as of Thursday night, Friday morning, where we tried to balance all the different competing realities that we have at play here. We tried to pick up the importance of the economic and property, flood safety aspects of our work, while also trying to think about how equity is at play in this work and what role the environment, climate resilience, what role those issues play. We are not done yet. It's obvious that there's probably thought. I'm watching some people's faces and seeing some thoughts forming. And so I think we can have a little bit of a conversation here, depending on how you feel about time. And then we would love to get your comments this week. So if you have specific thoughts, we're trying really hard to get everybody's the right balance, which is really complicated because you're not all in agreement with each other on everything, but we will do the best that we can. And I think with that, I'll stop talking and see if Jim wants to add anything as he plays with his seat and goes up and down.
Sitting down a long time. No, I'm really interested. I think we do have a few more rounds of revisions, and we really do appreciate the committee's feedback. We've got kind of a foot in the past and a foot in the future, and we're trying to find that right spot. So we are very open to your feedback, and I'm very familiar with working with large groups to try and massage something into something people can support. So I don't think we're quite there yet, but your feedback will be very valuable. And I'm not sure a 17-member board in session is the best way to wordsmith the document, but I'm up for it if you are. But we'd also be able to talk individually, or you could send your comments to us in writing and we'll capture them and process and get back to you with what we've done. I also want to thank the committee. They were really great and they met at 7:30 in the morning on our behalf, which was also kind of them. And Bob Salinger, I don't believe is here, but again, he provided some written feedback. I, again, just want to acknowledge their work on this.
So why don't we just take a minute or two and see what kind of comments people have right off the cuff. And then obviously we've got the whole week to, if you want to reach out to staff and have a conversation, or if you want to just submit some comments electronically, you can do that.
Be like, are we on the right track? Are we going the right direction? You know, 1 to 10, 10 being I love it, 1 I hate it. You know, just kind of help us zero in.
General impressions would be fine right now.
I just wanted to comment that the meeting at 7:30 got me out of bed at an unusual time for me, but the rewarding part was being able to see Evan's daughter, Naomi. So it was worth it. I didn't get to see Travis the dog, but I got to see Naomi. I think that the work is great. I applaud you for being able to take the comments that you got, and myself included. And so I haven't had a chance to thoroughly read it. I skimmed over it, but I saw where you changed some of the things. And so I'd appreciate being able to read it more in depth and get back to you if I have any comments. It's difficult for me to be able to bring the documents up, and I didn't want to print a 51-page document or go through and sort the pages. So that was just kind of my reason. So I apologize for not having more constructive comments now, but I'll get them to you the week.
Great. Thank you, Mary Helen.
Just have two
Go ahead,
quick
Jim.
comments. First, just glancing over this, a huge thank you. I see so many of my comments and values woven into this, and that it's on one page is somewhat miraculous. So nice job. I think if you want comments from the entire board, maybe just shoot out an individual email or some way to comment through some document sharing that would work best for you folks to pull all that together. But I just want to comment on quite a pithy statement. There's a lot here. Thank you.
Anybody else? I want to add my congratulations. Anybody that can actually distill all this stuff and keep it on one page is just short of miraculous. And
Evan gets the credit. She
well,
she made the biggest reduction, I think, in characters of all of us.
well, that's always a valuable asset to have somebody who can do that. I would really don't have a lot. I would add maybe in the 5th under respect, I might add, besides being friendly and efficient, I might add collaborative, but you can think about that. But other than that, I think you've done a pretty good job. And I'm always, whenever I've been involved in these things, I've always been challenged to differentiate the vision, which is how do we expect the future state to be, versus our mission and what are we supposed to be doing right now. And the differentiation between those things is sometimes clumsy and sometimes elegant, and it's hard to do. So I would just say, when you're writing that vision statement, put yourself in that perfect future and what are we trying to get to? And that's sometimes hard to do when you're so immersed in the church of what's happening now, you know? So.
Tell our staff that. That's one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah. But don't necessarily be captured by what is, but what could be. Yeah. So.
I just wanted to add, I'll share the congratulations on culling it to one page. It's a notable improvement and difference from when we reviewed it last time. I really love the vision one sentence for the reasons Mike just said. It's just what we're working towards. I will send written comments and probably share this a little more internally, but the only thing I may not see fully captured yet is the employment base within the drainage district. Obviously, I represent one of those large employers, but I think that's one thing that maybe I know is there, but I might want to think about some language that highlights it a little bit more. But mostly, congratulations to Evan and Jim and others on this.
Okay, you're going to send something out. I think that's a good suggestion to kind of prompt all of us. And we'll have until the end of the week to get comments in. Please take at least a few minutes and really give your responses to Jim and Evan, because this is kind of an important thing for us. It kind of sets the foundation for all of the different committees that are thinking about what's our task list that we have to prioritize, which ultimately ends up talking about investments and ultimately ends up talking about rate structures. And so this is a really foundational document. Sometimes we get lost in woo-woo land on this stuff, but it really does drive what we do and the cost of it and the prioritization of things. And so take a minute and take a look at it, give some feedback. We'd really appreciate it, I think. So thank
And
you.
just to point out, we can have a tagline later and we'll do some polling for the, external messaging, but this
You
is,
got it.
this is a good thing and it can be added to or supplemented, but please, if you need more time to give me a shout and we'll find a way to help get your feedback.
All right. Thanks to all, committee and staff. Good work. Thank you. I'm sorry, I've lost track. What's next? I think the budget foundation, right? Budget priorities.
That's correct. Good afternoon. My
Ben.
name is Ben Rowe. Thank you, Chair Jordan and the board for your time this afternoon. With my presentation, I really have two objectives. I wanted to give the board an overview of all 5 districts and the JCA, the budgets of those for 2022. So I have one slide and I can point some highlights of that so you can have an overview of our entire system budget. With that, I just want to recognize that each of those districts in the JCA is a separate entity at this time. So my second objective is, as you recall, our last time we met, I presented to the board a very brief overview of our budget process, and I asked for input into our budget priorities. And we got some feedback from the board, and some gave us feedback that they wanted to see more granularity in our staff recommended budget priorities. So I have that prepared today, and we wanted to continue that conversation and gain more feedback from the board on any additional budget priorities. So those are my two things. With that, I'm going to jump right into an overview of our system-wide budget. And I just want to make a few points here. These are rounded figures, so I've rounded these to the thousands or 10,000s in some cases. And also I wanted to point out that this beginning fund balance is a combined figure that includes undesignated, designated capital reserves and other reserves. So it's all of our reserve buckets combined. And then I also wanted to point out that when we look at net operations, I just looked at current revenues, excluding the beginning fund balance, and just looking at our operating expenditures, excluding capital. And then the second line, the change in fund balance, once we include capital, that is our change in fund balance due to our capital program. So it's okay if some of those points didn't make sense. You'll see that in MCDD, this $8 million, that really reflects our commercial loan, our $10 million commercial loan that's dedicated to our capital program. And so that's why that might look a little bit high. You'll notice that our assessments across the system, this $7.7 million, represents about 55% of our annual revenue generation for the system. And then our service contracts also represents about 31% of our annual revenue generation. And as we transition to the new urban flood safety and water quality district, this service contract line will change. So this will look different. So this revenue really reflects the revenue that we're receiving in a portion of the revenue that we're receiving from the services that we provide the other districts. And then this other revenue, you'll notice that in the urban flood safety and water quality district column here, you'll see that $1.2 million. That reflects the line of credit from the City of Portland Bureau of Environmental Services. Our personnel service, you'll notice that all of our personnel costs are in MCDD, and that reflects about 40% of our annual expenditures. And then you'll see also a very robust capital program that we have, about $3.1 million budgeted in the current year. And just want to make sure our debt service, I also wanted to notice that that reflects about 6% of our current expenditures. So this is a really brief overview of, as I said, the 5 districts and the JCA. And the next slide is similar. This is all of those same districts and the JCA combined, but it gives you a little bit of history. So it will show you our actual revenues and expenditures from 2019 to 21, in addition to the budget for 2022. And I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I did want to give this board an opportunity to see an overview of our operations. And I'm happy to entertain any quick questions before we move on.
I guess what I'm really thankful for Ben for is we're going to start to show you a little bit more of what you all are taking on, both on the operating side and the capital side. So you guys are making down payments on a system that you're going to run, and this is what that system starts to look like in terms of obligations. So you'll see more and more of this as we transition.
And if there are specific items or dynamics that this board wants to see in the future, we're happy to receive that feedback and come back to the board with that information. Okay, I'm going to transition now into our budget preview. This is the same slide deck that I presented in our last meeting, so I might go through this fairly quickly. We talked about our budget calendar overview, our budget approach, our current priorities, and also just requesting feedback from the board on any priorities going into the 2022-23 budget development. And I have for you, this is included in your packet. We included some more granularity on the staff recommended priorities going into 22-23 budget development. I believe that starts on page 43, 44, and I've included that in this presentation, so you can see that as well. So we will come back to this board in January with the financial forecast. We'll also come back to you next month in December with a proposed budget calendar and to approve a budget officer. And just a few items of note, we're targeting this board to approve the budget in April so that we can turn around very quickly and submit that to the Multnomah County Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission, the TSCC. That's required for us to submit that in May. And then we will have a TSCC budget hearing in June, and then closely followed after that, this board will approve the budget, the 2022-23 in June, and then it'll go to adoption and ratification with the county after that. Okay, just for the sake of time, I covered these last time we met, so I'm just going to scroll through these. And again, I do have more granularity on our proposed budget priorities. So this is in your packet, and these urban flood safety water quality district values are old. So this is on a prior mission vision values iteration. And so, but these are proposed priorities going into the 22-23 development. We've already heard some conversation around the legislative session. We've had, yeah, please.
We're not ditching safety enhancements, right? Those are safety enhancements for a ditch.
Very good question. Valid. Very valid. Yes. We're not ditching safety enhancements. That is for actual drainage ditches, safety enhancements. And I guess I could have added a word there, drainage ditch, safety enhancements. Yes. And then also security enhancements for staff, campus, and facilities. I also want to emphasize these are draft. These are not finalized, and we wanted feedback and input from the board. And I have 2 slides of these. So this is just the first slide, and also included in your packet. You'll see the majority of our focus is on the transition. And you heard Colin talk about the revenue structure um, and all that that entails. We want to make sure we plan on filling the vacant authorized positions to fill out our resources. We've talked about some of the constraints on staff. Continue to engage on the houselessness issues and really launch our engagement. One of the aspects that we've noticed is a real need to enhance our internal controls and systems, especially as we transition to the new district. So you'll see some of that. Those will be popping up as we talk about go through the budget development process. With that, this is our question to the board, and we'd be happy to entertain a discussion.
Any questions or comments at this stage? I know this is the beginning of a budget process, and I appreciate, Ben, the kind of delineation of the priorities that you're thinking about going in. I just wanted to mention, this is way down in the weeds, but the IT issue about servers, I'm sure that there are multiple organizations that you could rent a corner of their, where they have their servers, let's put it that way, data centers. And I can only speak for Portland. We just went through completely relocating the data center, and now it has out of state backup in case of a catastrophic event and in real time. So I'd say looking for a partner that has those kind of characteristics for their data centers and their backup processes might be a good buy for the district. So, other comments or questions at this point? All right.
I'll just comment that you made it very easy to understand for somebody that doesn't know budgets and is not an accountant, and it will help me greatly be able to give some information to neighbors who are in probably more accounting minded than I am, but this is wonderful. This is a great explanation, and it's sort of like if I can understand it, anybody can. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, I think the budget summary page is the clearest description I've seen of the collective budgets, and for me personally was much needed. So thank you for that.
Our
Great.
pleasure.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks, Ben. Okay, if no more comments or questions at this point, now, Evan, are you up again? Is that right?
I actually have to get in the car to go pick up my daughter, so I am
Oh.
going to ask Jim to step in for me, but thank you all.
Well, way more important. Don't miss that appointment.
That's right.
All right.
Thank you, Evan, and thanks for prepping me well. Board members, as you know, we have a couple of vacancies on your board, and we've asked you for some suggestions, and we've gotten a few in, and we're following up on them. I have a coffee tomorrow where I'm going to suggest someone reach out to Mike, but we think you could benefit from some additional candidates for your consideration. So in your packet, you should have an example of a personal email that you could use, some sample social media posts that we can put up on our channels that you can then forward or copy or do on your own. We're also prepared with your direction, because again, we want to really honor the fact that it's the board's role to recruit and select board members, not the staff's role. However, we can do some paid promotions on places like Max List or LinkedIn and other places. So we are all ears, but what we're seeking is to support you in generating a little more interest in your board replacement candidates. And so those materials are before you. So we have two asks of you. One, are those materials okay? And two, will you please help us distribute them if they are okay? Evan, did I get that right? You're on their phone now.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for pulling them together.
So feedback, gang. I know this is, I don't know that everybody signed up to be recruiters, but I know that that's part of the gig. So, and we've got a couple open spots. And as you could tell today, we were playing touch and go and having a quorum during this meeting. So filling those slots is kind of important. So, and I'll just say personally, thank you for the tools. I will use them and send them out to some folks that I'm aware of. And of course, Jim will be happy to take your phone call or email if you have a referral.
I have a question because I've sent a couple suggestions to you, and I don't want to keep asking those people if you asked them and they said no. I may know people to send them to that say Corky or James do. And I don't know if it's better that they get, if there's some way to track, we've asked these people and they've,
yeah,
I don't know how to do that because I'm going to use Judy Blue Horse Skelton as an example. Hard to get a hold of. Mike might have more influence in getting to her. Eric Mogren would probably have the most influence, but and he has a lot of connections to tribal nations. So I guess I need to know, I don't want to keep asking people when they've already said no, or I don't know how to track that.
Right. It's a good catch, Mary Helen. And I have yet to get a hold of Judy. I know that. And but
Mr. Chair, maybe you and I could connect offline and I can find out who you've contacted and staff can support you in sharing that information out.
Sure. And no, it's a good catch, Mary Helen. I haven't given you any feedback on your list that you gave me. So we'll do that.
Well, I won't give up sending them to you until they tell me to stop.
Thank you.
If the board desires, again, I want permission from you all to post on our social media channels about this because I don't want to get in front of your discretion on these board matters.
I would welcome getting the word out and any way we can.
All right, well, so we'll endeavor to do some posts on our channels. And again, with your approval, we'll go ahead and purchase a post on Mac's list and try and generate a little more interest. And again, if you need any support from anybody on the team, we're happy to go have coffee with you and them or whatever it takes to give them the information to make a good decision about their participation.
I think that's great.
Thank
any
you.
Any other questions or comments or about this issue? Okay. Jim, anything else for today? I think we made it through most of except maybe your report, if you have any.
I'm going to get you out on time. That's my commitment. I think the thing that there are two things I want to address. The first is security. We've had a range of break-ins here at campus, and so I used the authority you have vested in me to declare an emergency, and using that emergency declaration, we have procured armed security services. So we have armed security now on campus every evening from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And sometimes on weekends we extend that because again, our shop had been broken into 4 times. So you will see in the pending meetings a very large contract amendment for several $100,000 that extends multiple years that gives us the ability to use armed guards when we need them. Over the weekend, the connection to the weekend's events of heavy rainfall is we amended that contract over the weekend to allow those armed security services to help us at some of the sites where we are struggling to have our operations team feel like they have the sort of workplace safety required for them to conduct their business. So we've made good progress at Pump Station 4 to address the immediate flooding needs of Fairview Lake, but the security situation is still not great because our law enforcement resources are so thin. They're really not available to us unless there is a critical emergency. That occurred this weekend with the flooding at Fairview Lake. And I want to thank Commissioner Lori Stegman for her support with Multnomah County Sheriff, who was able to deploy 2 officers to spend time with us through the weekend while we got the pump station up and functioning. Was also able to talk to Portland Police Chief Chuck Lavelle, and he was able to dedicate 1 car here for a portion of the day. He had 3 cars available to patrol North Precinct on Saturday, just to give you a sense of how strapped their resources are. But when it is a crisis, they're willing to help, and they did show up. We're also getting good help from PBOT. They've really helped us remove a bunch of vehicles from that site. We had our vendor on site all weekend, placing eco blocks to secure access, and we're working in collaboration with Portland Parks to obtain a non-parks use permit for the barriers that we've placed. And they were thoughtful enough to give us an emergency permit this weekend to address the flooding issues. That said, oh yeah, thank you, Evan. Mayor Lauer of Troutdale was also instrumental, both in his role as mayor and as a public works director for Fairview in helping us access law enforcement resources. So big kudos to him. He's also provided a lot of help in communicating with the Fairview Lake community about the things we were doing and helping us manage some of the anger that came from the lake levels getting so high. But this is going to be an ongoing struggle to operate that station. We had Water Bureau Security, and Mike Jordan's been helping us, trying to connect us to the Bureau of Environmental Services Security. But it's just a sketchy situation. There was gunfire out there on Veterans Day, not at our crew, but really close by. And then our vendor today was threatened by one of the campers, and so we got PPB out there. But in the meantime, we really had courageous staff out there this weekend. And we have some very legitimate safety concerns coming from our operations team that we're struggling to figure out how to manage. But we're going to do everything we can. The pump station is currently operational, and we have water levels down below where we think we need them to be to provide flood safety for the current time period. We did implement our emergency operations team over the weekend to address the situation, and I want to give kudos to Colin Rowan for serving as our incident commander. I want to thank Bill Owen for spending all of this weekend out on site. Carrie Sandeman, who was here, worked on both days. Basically, the whole team did, but several of us actually spent time at Pump Station 4, and I want to give extra shout out to them because the conditions are just not great. These are conditions that are all over the city of Portland and all over other areas. And I just want to really make sure you all know that all the agencies involved are doing what they can to support us, but resources are really strapped. So it's really easy to feel angry and to want to place blame. I don't think that's going to be effective or appropriate. It's not going to help us get through this situation. So we will be spending more money on these things, but I do think we have the situation under control. Happy to answer any questions, but I'd rather move on and tell you that we expect a fairly good article in the Portland Tribune this week about our broader effort to upgrade and modernize our system. The reporter is Jim Redden. I've done a lot of work with him. I suspect there may be some technical issues in his content. However, I think the big thrust of the article will probably be very positive. So if you have specific technical issues on inaccuracies, let me know. Jim works hard to get those things right, but it's a complicated story. And I do believe that he will ultimately capture the big picture really quite well. We're really focused on trying to get that first tranche of local match for the PMLS projects to get 2/3 federal share. That's on the pre-construction engineering and design study. For those of you who are on the district boards, you're familiar with our work to try and generate the first payment that's due in October, about a year from now. And then last, we do want to bring you a larger briefing on your capital obligations beyond when we dissolve the historic districts. And we want to give you a more thorough briefing on all the aspects of the capital programs that you'll be inheriting, including the PMLS project, but also the FEMA certification projects and the other projects that we need to do to update our system so that you can start to familiarize yourself with what you're inheriting as the urban board. And so more to come on that. And with that, it is 5 o'clock and I'm standing between you and freedom, and that's not a good place to stand. So.
Well, Jim, before we sign off, I want to say thank you to you and the staff that you've noted, and all the whole crew. It's an all hands on deck kind of moment, and I know how hard that is. And I also want to say that you're right in that there are multiple entities around sharing the frustration of trying to keep essential infrastructure safe and operable and serviceable by our folks. This interface between employee safety and infrastructure operation has become an untenable situation in many places, as you noted, across the city and across the region. And I will say that I think this incident this weekend got the attention of a number of people at the City of Portland. And so I think we'll be trying to reevaluate that intersection between essential infrastructure and employee safety, because we quite frankly can't maintain and operate a number of locations in the city without help. And to think that you and your staff believe that it takes armed guards to keep a place operational is a telling judgment that you've had to make. And we need to talk more about that more broadly among public entities, because that's a public safety issue that, again, I think is untenable over the long term. So appreciate everything you've done. And I think I speak for everybody. We know how hard it is. And thank you for all of your time and effort and energy to keep everything running. It's not easy.
Well, please send your thoughts to our operations team, and they're doing everything they can. And I think they're really struggling with all this, and they have a really strong commitment to their work. But, you know, as one of them said, I've got a 2-year-old daughter. It's not worth my life. So
right.
we do really need to understand where they're coming from and try and give them the support that they deserve. So it's a tricky thought.
So,
well, it's way beyond, it's not beyond my belief, because I know it happened, but beyond my bandwidth that how I would react. And so I also wanted just 2 things to consider. How can we support those people that might have a loss of income if they have to quit their job to take care of, to life? And so I think we need to support that as well. Some sort of hazard pay. I don't know if it's hazard pay or I don't know how you do that, but just consider, I don't want somebody to have to lose a job because of bad behavior of other people, and we're not able to contain those. So, I wouldn't have any problem paying somebody to not go to work to get shot at. And then just quick to tag on at the end, can we at some point get a, Shirley Craddock had brought up about a new meeting date, and somehow stick that in a doodle poll at some point. But I just can't say enough, and Mike said it very eloquently, how brave those people are to keep more houses from not flooding. North Portland precinct and the 3 cars, that's just unheard of. So as bad as it was, I think, like Mike said, this woke a lot of people up to what could really happen. And, I hope that we don't have to have any more incidents of gunfire.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you all for your support and understanding. I know that means a lot to the team.
All right, gang. Thanks again for being here. We really appreciate it. And some feedback back to Evan and Jim regarding mission, vision, values by the end of the week.
We'll send some document out to you that's easy for you to access. I'll work with Evan on that. It may happen tomorrow morning, but we'll get you either a Word document or some way for you to collaborate on it, okay?
Great. See you all. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
See you later.
Appreciate it.